Okay, this is being recorded, video recorded from my home in Santa Monica, Pacific Palisades. I've been wanting to do this for a long time, and it just seemed daunting where to begin. I have a lot of thoughts on climate change alarmism and other issues, but I was inspired by this adorable young man. I say adorable young man because he's old enough to be my son, but Mike Cernovich, he has written this book, Guerrilla Mindset, really geared toward men, but I actually find it inspiring. But anyway, he said something in a discussion he was having online with Stefan Molyneux, and he started talking about how you get started in a podcast, in a video podcast. And he said something that really struck me, and it was this: think big, start small. And I realized that was my problem. So here I am, warts and all. I haven't rehearsed this. It wasn't like the TED Talk where I memorized everything. I'm just going to talk to you the same way I talk to friends, scientists, family members, because I have lots of opinions on a lot of different issues, particularly regarding health, psychology, you name it. But let's stick to climate change alarmism and my thoughts about that, and particularly my thoughts about the science underpinning, the so-called science underpinning climate change alarmism. Because I notice a lot of people don't want to attack that. They rightly so look at business issues and the importance of energy in our economy, all of those things, but they're afraid to be seen as anti-science. Well, folks, I have news for you. I am not afraid, because anybody that knows me knows that I love science. I have a master's degree in engineering from Caltech. Not that that makes me brilliant or anything, but I know the scientific method. I know what science is supposed to be, and I have always loved science. And I subscribe to all the magazines. There's Nature, Science, Science News, Scientific American. That's really gotten bad. But so I thought this topic is just too large. So where do I start? So I'm just going to start with one area, rising sea levels, because this is a really hard one to pin down. So let me start with this article I was reading in Nature magazine. Satellite error hid rising seas. Now, you don't have to, I really encourage people, don't be intimidated by something like scientists say. That's like, well, it's called an appeal to authority. But scientists may know their particular field very well, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they know other fields of science. It becomes part of a group identity. I'm a scientist, so if scientists in this field say this, well, I'm going to stick with them. And that's generally what happens. But sometimes they get curious and start looking into it. And in fact, that's kind of become my litmus test as to whether someone is really smart. Well, I tend to like independently minded people anyway, who aren't afraid to challenge the status quo. My recently departed husband was really well known for that. One of the reasons why I adored him so much, but that's a whole, and again, that's another story. So let me start with this one. Satellite error hid rising seas. Revised tallies confirm that the rate of sea level increase is accelerating as Earth warms and ice sheets thaw. Now here's the thing I find interesting about these data manipulations. Whenever there's a change in data, and you could see that could happen, right? You could find, oh, we need to fix the data, account for some biases or whatever. You would expect that sometimes it would go in one direction and sometimes it would go in the other direction. But I have never, and I repeat, never seen it go in a way that doesn't add to the climate change alarmism narrative. Now, I don't think that people do this like they're lying, because I'm very interested in how the brain works. And one of the things I've noticed is your brain can only see certain things. Like, I definitely have confirmation bias now. I've made up my mind climate change alarmism is bogus. So you couldn't present, you almost could not present me now with an argument that would make me think otherwise. But again, I diverge. Let's go back to my point. Okay, so this was in the July 20th, 2017 Nature. The numbers didn't add up. As Earth grew warmer and glaciers and ice sheets thawed. Well, ice sheets have not been thawing. That's a whole nother issue, because here's a NASA study in 2015 indicated the East Antarctic ice sheet has been adding more ice annually than the West Antarctic ice sheet was losing. East Antarctica's glaciers are adding ice, have been stable for an estimated 600 years, and are likely to remain stable for at least 500 years more. So when you hear that the ice sheets are melting, sea ice doesn't matter, it doesn't add to sea level rise. It's bogus. I'll just say right now it's bogus. So, and also sea level rise, oh my God, we're just talking about minuscule amounts, and seas have been rising since the last ice age. You don't have to worry about something that is slow, just a slow secular change. What you care about are the big dramatic changes, like a tsunami hitting. So when you talk about, oh, poor people, rising seas, seriously, right? A foot or whatever in a century, that's a problem? Please. Okay, but they got to scare people, so you show a picture of the rising seas like it's happening fast, which it's not. Okay. Now remember, you don't have to be a scientist or know anything about science to catch these errors, even in a magazine like Nature, unless you're a true believer. You won't see it. So they had decades of satellite data that seemed to show that the rate of sea level rise was holding steady or even declining. Now, after puzzling over this discrepancy for years, scientists have identified its source, a problem with the calibration of a sensor on the first of several satellites launched to measure the height of sea surface using radar. Adjusting the data to remove that error suggests, now scientists always say suggest, they don't speak in certainties, that sea levels are indeed rising at a faster rate each year. Now, it took them decades to find this. Now, I'm not saying, I don't have any way of knowing if this is actually true. I mean, it could be, but I just find it suspicious. And I'll go on and show. Not suspicious that, no, you can find always something, oh, that wasn't calibrated right. Let me calibrate it this way, okay? I'm not the first person to point this out, by the way. This happens in all kinds of temperature data sets. But let's go on. I actually find it humorous. You're reading this and you're going, I cannot believe this. The rate of sea level rise is increasing. Now, they don't tell you how much it's increasing because it's like virtually nothing. And that increase is basically what we expected, said a remote sensing expert at the University of Colorado Boulder, who is leading the reanalysis. Now, here's another thing. You find something that adds to the climate change alarmism narrative, and you will get your paper published in Nature or Science. And Nature and Science, okay, these are the premier scientific publications. You get your paper in that, you're doing pretty well. It's hard. And they won't print pretty much anything that doesn't add to the narrative. So this guy presented the as yet unpublished data on the 13th of July, New York City, at a conference sponsored by the World Climate Research Program and the International Oceanographic Commission, among others. Now, if you have a group called the World Climate Research Program, say Judith Curry found something. Very, very smart woman. Love that woman. Anyway, do you think she'd be able to present her paper? It would be accepted to be presented, her findings, at the World Climate Research Program? No. These people already know what's happening, and you better feed that narrative or you won't get published. Kind of like Dr. Atkins with the low-carb diet back in the 70s. He was just considered a heretic for going against the fact that you could eat cholesterol, you could eat higher fat, and still do well with your heart health. In fact, do better. Again, I digress. His team calculated that the rate of sea level rise increased from around 1.8 millimeters per year in 1993 to roughly 3.9 millimeters per year today as a result of global warming. Now, I just want to put these numbers in perspective. Let's say they did, this is all true, okay? These recalculations. Do you know how little that is? A millimeter, okay, meter's like a yard, right? That's a thousandth of a meter. It's like this much. And really think about what that means. It's funny, actually. How would you measure that globally? Even with satellites, to really get that kind of accuracy. Do you know how difficult that is? I mean, this is funny. It's sad, but funny. In addition to the satellite calibration error, his analysis also takes into account other factors that influence sea level rise in the last several decades. And he goes on with a bunch of things. He tried to account for Mount Pinatubo in 1991 and the recent El Nino climate pattern. It's like my JPL mug. I love it. I love black and red. I love that combination. I got to visit JPL and get a one-on-one tour of the rover before the rover, I even got to drive it. It was cool. I was with John Grotzinger. He gave me a one-on-one tour. It was fun. He's the science lead for the Mars rover mission. I do a lot of things with Caltech. I give money to. Okay. The results align with 3 recent studies that have raised questions about the earliest observations of sea surface height. So basically what they're doing is they're going back and saying, our earlier measurements that measured sea surface, yeah, they're not right. But anyway, what are they talking about? We've only had satellites observing these things since 1979. I don't know about the sea level stuff, that might have come later, but I know the temperature was 1979. So the Earth could have a 50-year warming period. That doesn't, just because we have a warming period and we have increasing CO2 levels, that's correlation. Doesn't necessarily mean it's causation, because prior to that, we had this like 30-year cooling period when CO2 levels were going up. Okay? There was a correlation with increasing CO2 and dropping temperatures. So keep in mind that you really can't know anything about climate by just looking at a couple decades. It doesn't tell you enough. Climate is a longer term thing, and we have all these huge, I've read a ton of books on this, And there's a lot of good information about all these different cycles that are out there. That's what we need to understand. I do support researching climate, but the fixation on this climate change alarmism narrative is really screwing up climate science. We should have good climate science. Okay. Still goes on and on. But let me point out a few things. Okay, so definitely, so they say the satellite altimetry measurements were too high during the first 6 years that they were collected. Okay, so they're making those lower now because it was too high before. So it's like showing, ooh, we're increasing more, okay, adding to the alarm. Now here's the thing. The problem was first identified by 2015 by a group that included John Church, an oceanographer at the University of New South Wales in Sydney, Australia. Now, who is this John Church? So he's obviously bugged that we weren't showing what he thought we should see in the. So he's thinking about it. You can always come up with something. Unfortunately, nobody's thinking about the other ways, like maybe some calibrations are wrong in the other direction, but nobody's looking at that because nobody has a narrative to feed, and they wouldn't be able to get it published anyway, probably, or get funds for their research. And the reason I pick up John Church is that something I've noticed, and I'll show you, I have not been the only one to notice this, that happens, which to me ruins the science. Because you shouldn't have an opinion of what you want to find. You should just look at the science and see what it leads you to. But here is what John Church says at the end of the article. All of this gives us much more confidence that we understand what is happening. Much more confidence. You should listen to Scott Adams. He's got some interesting things to say about confidence. I'm confident about this. He was referring to the intelligence community, but it applies here too. Says John Church, who adds that humanity needs to reduce its output of greenhouse gas emissions, and quickly. So in the science article, he brings in religion. He's now got the solution. First of all, we could still have a major warming trend without any increase in greenhouse gas emissions. And that wouldn't change the fact that sea level is rising. The decisions we make now will have impacts for hundreds and perhaps thousands of years. Holy cow. How do they publish something like this in a science magazine? I am so disgusted with that. Because I have always loved science. And when I see things like that, it's pretty bad. And then what I've noticed, because there are a lot of good science papers that come out with articles and research that doesn't support the narrative. So I was reading this surprisingly good book. This is like the book I would love to write. But I keep thinking, why would I write a book? There are so many good books out there, but you don't hear about them. But once you do, oh my God, there's a ton of them. So this guy, Michael Hart, wrote a book. He's an emeritus professor in Ottawa, Canada. Anyway, the first chapter, it's Hubris is the name, The Troubling Science, Economics, and Politics of Climate Change. So I had been noticing this. So let's see. Oh, I had it to the wrong page. Here's one of the things he says. Over the past half century, knowledge and research have become ever more narrow and specialized, and cross-cutting interdisciplinary work even rarer. In both research laboratories and academia, money and prestige flow increasingly to the narrowly focused. As a result, many investigators need to accept on faith the conclusions of various other experts in order to push the boundaries of their own areas of specialization. So they don't really look at it, they just say it's true. Oh shoot, that one piece I had it in the wrong. It was really something interesting. But anyway, he pointed out gosh, I know as soon as I turn this off, I'm going to find it. He pointed out that if you are saying something, like when I was reading about the West Antarctic ice sheet decreasing, but the East Antarctic was increasing more. In other words, the Antarctic ice sheet as a whole was increasing. At the very end, he said, well, this doesn't diminish, climate change, the problems of climate change, and maybe in 30 years it will switch. And I thought, what does that? You didn't study that. What does that have to do? But then I realized that you have to. I used to think of it's like Galileo saying his things in the saint of the Catholic Church. Yes, the Earth goes around the sun, but God still exists. What does that have to do with anything? Not with what he was saying. Just that the Earth goes around the sun. Leave it at that. But he couldn't. And I'm not saying Galileo said that, but that's the same kind of thing. Okay. Sorry. I have so many things underlined in this first, the problem stating. This is so good that it's sad that Okay, well, here's one of the things he said. One would never know there are dissenters of distinguished credentials in the scientific community. Even when their existence is admitted, they are thoroughly marginalized, accused of being in the pay of the oil companies. That's such baloney. Or dismissed as over-the-hill retirees out to touch and perhaps a bit senile. That really bugs me because these over-the-hill retirees have nothing to lose and they're smart. Some of these people are just brilliant. And then to be attacked that way. So Will Happer is one. Freeman Dyson is another. I mean, these guys really understand complex dynamic systems. Somebody that gets in there and says, well, I know how to play around with climate models. Who are the people going into climate science now? They're all believers. So that field is pretty much ruined for now. It says their articles are denied publication in Science and Nature, these two so-called flagship science journals of high reputation. Oh, I found it on page 13. Funding for research that takes a more critical approach or that examines the possibility that there may be benefits to climate change is much more difficult to obtain. And here's the key sentence. Studies that reach findings at odds with mainstream dogma routinely add a sentence or two in the abstract or conclusions to reassure readers that the findings do not invalidate the politically correct orthodoxy, even when they do. to reassure readers that the findings do not invalidate the politically correct orthodoxy, even when they do. And they do. So when I saw that, I thought, that's exactly what I've been noticing. So try that. Read anything. Read, when you see some article come out, just look at it and read it very carefully. So that doesn't prove anything. So I do want to say one more thing on this issue, because as I think I mentioned earlier, a scientist or anybody who looks carefully at this issue and still thinks it's a problem, I don't think of him as very smart. I mean, it's kind of a litmus test for me. So, for example, I was interested in hearing the discussion between Sam Harris. I found his books interesting in the past. And I always thought of him as a highly intelligent person. And Scott Adams, whom I really enjoyed listening to as of late, listening to his periscopes and YouTube videos. But anyway, so they had a discussion. And at first, Sam Harris talked a lot about why he didn't like Trump. And I thought, well, you know, that's his view. I actually like Trump, but you can have that view, no problem, no problem. But then when they started talking about climate change, first of all, I was a little disappointed that Scott Adams, but I understand it. He did talk about climate models being a little bit bogus because he knows economic models and they're bogus. But as I listened, I was shocked at how ignorant Sam Harris was. He actually used, he said, suppose that, I'm paraphrasing here because I only listened to it once, but he said something like, suppose there is an asteroid that's going to hit the Earth, and JPL scientists have done all the calculations, and I'm going to say they're not true. And I thought, he is comparing orbital calculations, which are very precise and exact. We know that, okay? To the dynamics of a complex system that we don't fully understand. And we know we don't fully understand. We can't even predict the weather very well. I mean, a week or two in advance, we can't predict the weather. We're getting better at predicting it, you know, within a week. And that's because the weather models, you get feedback. And so you just change the model and you keep seeing, okay, that's not working. So you fix it. That's not working. You have a chance to fix it. But go out a month or two, we don't know how to do that. So he was comparing orbital calculations. And I thought, I used to think he was intelligent. Wow. Wow. He just believes it. And I think what happens is, and this gets to Alex Epstein, who wrote The Moral Case for Fossil Fuels. What is your standard of reference? See, I love technology. I love advancement. I think we humans have a right to be here. And so things are just going to get better and better and better in the future. And I think of these poor kids. Unfortunately, I used to be in that camp. Oh, God, I remember the first Earth Day. Okay, now I'm really getting on. I was 16, and I read that the Earth only had like 40 years left. And I was really scared. And of course, there was all this stuff about the population bomb. I was in the Air Force. I went in 74. And I contributed some of my salary, which was not very much, to zero population growth. Because I thought, this is really terrible about the Earth's population. So I can talk a lot about that too. I really like Julian Simon. I could just talk on and on. So I said I was going to stick to sea level change, so this won't be too long, and that's what I've done. But I'm doing this again. Think big, start small, because I have a lot of ideas on health. Look at my muscles. Longevity, politics. I served in the Clinton administration. A lot of things I want to talk about. So I hope you enjoy this, and over time, I'll get better. I won't ramble so much. Oh, I have one more thing. You should watch this on PBS. The Farthest. Do you see that? It's Voyager in space. I went to a VIP reception and screening of this at Caltech last night. And this was really good. This was about the Voyager 1 and 2. And I think they did a beautiful job. And it's going to be on PBS August 23rd. And it will encore on Wednesday, September 13th. It's sort of interesting. It's been a 40-year mission. I think it's Voyager 2 has already left the heliosphere. And I remember going with my mother was visiting, and my husband Harold, so we got a VIP ticket, my brother Doug, and we went to JPL when it did the Neptune flyby in 1989. And so I was just thinking about the fact that also when it was launched in 1977, the two Voyagers, I was just getting out of the Air Force and starting at Cal Poly Pomona, where I studied engineering. And School of Engineering, Cal Poly Pomona. I was inducted into their Hall of Fame in 2017. Quite an honor. It really shouldn't have been Hall of Fame, maybe Hall of Accomplishment. I was a little embarrassed about, but then, okay, I'll take it. They want to call it the Hall of Fame? I'll get it. But anyway, I am definitely rambling. I hope you've enjoyed this, and there'll be more, and on all sorts of subjects. So thank you for listening, and that's it.